Imagine waking up and realizing the world moved on without you. That's exactly what happened to one town when everyone fell asleep for 20 years. The story begins in the quiet town of Ashbourne, a place so small it barely appeared on most maps. Nestled between rolling hills and endless stretches of farmland, it was the kind of town where doors were left unlocked and neighbors still gathered on porches to share gossip long after sunset. Life was predictable, ordinary. But on the night of August 14th, 1999, everything changed. That evening, the townspeople went about their routines. Shopkeepers locked up their stores. Children played outside until the streetlights flickered on. Families gathered for dinner. Nothing unusual, except for a strange, electric tension in the air. Some remembered the crickets stopping their song. Others swore the stars appeared brighter than ever before. But no one could explain what happened next. At exactly 11:47 p.m., every single person in Ashbourne collapsed into sleep. Not just a tired, end-of-the-day slumber, but a deep, unnatural unconsciousness. It happened instantly. Drivers on the road slumped over their wheels. A man watching late-night television dropped his remote as his head hit the armrest. Mothers tucking in their children collapsed mid-sentence. Even dogs curled up in their yards, motionless, chests barely rising. The entire town, asleep. When dawn broke, the sun rose over an eerie silence. The world outside Ashbourne carried on. Cars passed on the distant highway. Radios broadcasted their morning news. But inside the town limits, nothing stirred. Birds avoided the streets, insects vanished. For 20 years, the town was frozen in that perfect moment of stillness. No one aged, no one woke. It wasn't until September 3rd, 2019, that the impossible happened. A farmer named David Harper, who lived on the edge of the town border, had avoided Ashbourne for decades. Locals from surrounding areas whispered that the place was cursed. But on that day, Harper noticed something odd. Smoke rising from a chimney inside the abandoned town. He drove closer, uneasy, and what he saw made his blood run cold. People were walking the streets, not strangers, not ghosts, but the very same townsfolk who had disappeared 20 years earlier. Their clothes hadn't aged, their faces hadn't changed. To them, it was still 1999. When David Harper stepped into Ashbourne's main street, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. The faces staring back at him weren't strangers. They were people he'd seen in old photographs, frozen in time. Children skipped rope, their laughter echoing against cracked buildings. The baker's wife carried loaves of bread, steam rising as if they'd just come from the oven. The mayor adjusted his tie, walking toward the courthouse as though the last 2 decades had never passed. "Good morning," one man called cheerfully, tipping his hat. Harper's mouth went dry. That man, Thomas Avery, had been declared legally dead in 2006. Yet here he was, his hair still black, his smile unchanged, not a day older than when Harper last saw him in high school. Shaking, Harper whispered, "You've been gone 20 years." But the townsfolk only looked confused. To them, it was still August 15th, 1999. News of Ashbourne's awakening spread like wildfire. Journalists, scientists, and government officials swarmed the small town within hours. Cameras flashed. Reporters shoved microphones into the faces of bewildered townsfolk. Some asked if this was a hoax. Others demanded proof. The proof was undeniable. Medical tests revealed the impossible. Every single resident had the vitals of a perfectly healthy person in their late 1990s state. Children who had been 6 were still 6. Parents were still parents, unchanged. Birth certificates, dental records, even old-school photos matched perfectly. It was as if time itself had ignored Ashbourne. But not everything was untouched. While the people remained the same, the town around them had decayed. Paint peeled from houses, cars rusted where they sat, abandoned. Grocery shelves collapsed under dust and mold, and yet the residents didn't notice. They insisted everything looked normal. "I just swept this porch yesterday," claimed Mrs. Caldwell, standing on wood so rotten it broke beneath a cameraman's boot. Something was wrong. Researchers set up labs on the edge of town, trying to understand what had happened. They took samples of air, water, and soil. They questioned the residents endlessly. The only consistent answer from the townsfolk was chilling. "We just went to sleep and woke up the next morning." But to the outside world, that morning had come 20 years too late. Tensions rose quickly. Families who had moved away years ago now stood face to face with loved ones who hadn't aged a single day. Sons were older than their fathers. Daughters were older than their mothers. People clung to one another, sobbing in disbelief. Others ran away, unable to face the horror of lost time. And then came the strangest discovery of all. While inspecting the old courthouse, a team of scientists found something unusual in the basement. A massive circular symbol burned into the concrete floor. Perfectly symmetrical, carved with symbols no one recognized. The townsfolk denied ever seeing it before. Yet tests revealed the scorch marks were fresh, as if created in the last 24 hours, not 2 decades ago. Something had happened that night in 1999. Something beyond sleep. Something that was still unfinished. And Harper, the man who had first witnessed their return, couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As days turned into weeks, Ashbourne became the center of global fascination. Scientists in hazmat suits combed through every corner of the town, while news crews broadcast live 24 hours a day. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was alien abduction. Religious groups declared it a miracle or a curse. But beneath the noise, something sinister was stirring. At first, it was the dreams. The townsfolk began reporting the same visions each night. A dark forest, a circle of fire, and a towering figure standing just beyond the flames. His face was always hidden in shadow, but his voice whispered the same words again and again. "You are not free yet." Children woke, screaming, clawing at their bedsheets. Adults stumbled through the streets at night, sleepwalking toward the edge of town. Guards were posted to keep them inside, afraid they would wander into the woods and vanish. Then came the second sign. The strange circular symbol found beneath the courthouse began to reappear. Not just in the basement, but burned into the bark of trees, carved into doors, even seared into the asphalt of Main Street. No one saw who made them. They simply appeared. Experts tried to replicate the markings but failed. The symbols radiated heat as if they'd been branded by fire, yet there were no scorch marks nearby. The people of Ashbourne grew restless. Some demanded answers from the government. Others prayed in the church until their voices went hoarse. But no one could explain why the town had slept, or why they had awakened now. And then, people started disappearing again. It began with a young boy named Matthew. He was playing in his backyard when his mother turned away for just a moment. When she looked back, the swing was still moving, but the child was gone. The next night, an elderly woman vanished from her bed. Her sheets were neatly folded, as though she had risen willingly. By the end of the week, 12 people had disappeared without a trace. Panic gripped Ashbourne. Families barricaded themselves in their homes. Scientists urged evacuations, but the townsfolk refused to leave. "This is our home," they insisted. "We slept here. We woke here. We belong here." Harper, watching all of this unfold, noticed something chilling. Every missing person's name matched one of the 12 chairs carved into the courthouse basement floor, surrounding the circular symbol. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was taking them. Late one night, Harper stood outside the courthouse, staring at the glowing symbols etched into the stone. His breath came in shallow bursts as he realized the truth. The town hadn't just slept for 20 years. It had been claimed. And whatever had claimed it was coming back. The night of September 21st arrived like a storm. Ashbourne was silent, yet heavy with dread. Families huddled together in candle-lit rooms, afraid to close their eyes, afraid to sleep. But outside, the symbols burned brighter than ever, glowing faintly as though alive. Harper knew it was time. He gathered with the scientists in the courthouse basement, where the 12 chairs stood in a perfect circle. 11 names had already been claimed by the missing. Only one chair remained, and carved deep into its surface was his own name. Harper's pulse thundered in his ears. "Why me?" he whispered, but no one answered. The townsfolk above had stopped resisting. Some wept quietly, others prayed, but most stared blankly into the night, as though hypnotized. Then, at midnight, the earth trembled. The courthouse lights flickered. The symbols on the floor flared like molten fire. And from the darkness between the flames, the towering figure appeared, just as he had in the townsfolk's dreams. He was massive, cloaked in shadows, his face veiled by smoke. But his presence was suffocating, filling the room with the weight of something older than time itself. His voice shook the walls. 20 years you rested. 20 years I waited. The debt is not paid. Panic erupted. Scientists fled. Some townsfolk collapsed, clutching their chests. Harper stood frozen, staring into the void where the figure's eyes should have been. The shadow raised an arm, and one by one, the missing 12 appeared within the circle. Their faces were blank, their eyes glowing faintly. They moved in unison, sitting in the 12 chairs as if bound by invisible chains. And then, in a voice that was both many and one, they spoke. "We are the guardians of the slumber. The cycle must continue." The fire blazed higher, engulfing the circle. Harper felt himself being pulled forward, dragged by unseen hands toward the final empty chair. He fought, digging his heels into the stone, but the pull was relentless. At the last moment he screamed, "Why us? Why Ashbourne?" The figure leaned closer, and for the first time, Harper saw a glimpse of its face. It wasn't monstrous. It wasn't alien. It was human, a reflection of himself, older, broken, consumed by darkness. "Because you chose," the shadow whispered, "and you will choose again." With that, Harper was forced into the chair. The circle erupted in blinding light. A sound like 1,000 voices screaming filled the air. And then, silence. When the light faded, the courthouse was empty. The 12 chairs were gone. So were the missing. So was Harper. The people of Ashbourne awoke the next morning as if nothing had happened. To them, it was just another day. They smiled, they worked, they laughed. They had no memory of the fear, the disappearances, or the figure in the flames. But on the edge of town, carved into the stone of an abandoned barn, a new symbol appeared. This one larger, deeper. It marked the beginning of another cycle. Because Ashbourne hadn't escaped, it had only begun again.